Let's go ahead and do a few unemployment examples. And I've drawn up a few numbers and three different categories of people for you. We have the population, which equals to 500 in our little sample economy. 300 people are employed and 50 people are unemployed. So starting us off, let's go ahead and ask how many people are in the labor force? Labor force. So how many people are in our labor force with these three numbers right here? If we remember, the labor force is a sum of those employed and unemployed. We have these numbers right here. So it's simply going to be 300 plus 50. The number of people that are declared in our labor force is equal to 350 people. How about not in the labor force? So those that cannot be considered employed or unemployed. So not in labor force. Labor force. So here, you either have to be in the labor force or not in the labor force. If we only have 500 people within our entire economy and 350 of them are in the labor force, that means the other difference, the other portion, has to be not in the labor force. So if you take your population, subtract out of the people in the labor force, which is 350, this will give us 150 people not in the labor force. So they're not employed or unemployed. So always remember that in the labor force plus not in the labor force, it has to equal our population or however many people are within our economy. Finally, let's go ahead and figure out the unemployment rate. So we'll denote this shorthand as UR. Unemployment rate, remember, is the number of people unemployed divided by the labor force. So in this instance, it's going to equal to 50 people that are unemployed. That number is being provided to us. And the labor force, which is the sum of employed, 300, plus the sum plus those that are unemployed. Don't forget that portion out. So 50 over 350 will give us 0.1429. If you want to go ahead and put this in percentage, just multiply it by 100, and our unemployment rate is equal to 14.29%. So like we said, very easy calculations when it comes to unemployment. Just figure out unemployed divided by the labor force. However, like with most problems, we can go ahead and introduce a little bit more complexity to all these problems. So let's go ahead and introduce a few dynamic changes. So what happens if 50 additional workers, if 50 additional workers who weren't looking to work, decide to actively seek employment again. So here, if 50 additional workers who weren't looking to work decide to actively seek employment again. So we have 50 people that were not in the labor force decide to go ahead and seek employment again. And let's go ahead and assume that every single one of these people do not find a job, but none find a job. So they don't actually have a job at this current moment in time. How do you think all of these things are going to change now? So how many people unemployed do we have? So number unemployed. Is this going to go up or is this going to go down? Obviously, this number should go up. Before, we had 50 people unemployed, but now 50 additional workers now decide to actively seek work again, but they haven't found a job, so therefore they are also counted as unemployed. So we add in these 50 additional workers. We now have doubled the number of people unemployed. We have 100 people unemployed. What does this do for our labor force? So LF in this instance. Before, we had 300 people employed, so that still stays true. But now the number of unemployed jumps up to 100. So we add in these people right here. We now have 400 people within our labor force. Before we had 350. Now we have 400 people because these 50 additional workers decide to seek work. What does this tell us about not in the labor force? So not in labor force, it tells us that those not in the labor force is going to decline. So here, they've actively seeking jobs again. Remember, we still have 500 people within our little economy. So 500 minus the 400 people in the labor force will give us a difference of people not in the labor force, which equals to 100. And what do you think is going to happen to our unemployment rate? Well, if more people look for jobs but they don't get them, our unemployment rate has to go up. So unemployment rate in this instance, suppose is going to be following that formula that we've given to you. So unemployed is now going to equal to 100. That was the very first thing that we've solved. And those in the labor force, which is equal to 400. So 100 divided by 400, our unemployment rate has shot up to 25%. So 0.25 equals 25% unemployment. So notice that the unemployment rate is only taking the ratio of those that don't have a job against those that are in the labor force. It's not taking against everybody within the economy or the entire population. And of course, we can add just a little bit more complexity with this problem here and go ahead and assume that, hey, what happens if half of these workers actually found a job? So what would happen? What would happen if half of these entrants found jobs? So what would happen if half of these entrants found jobs? So out of these 50 people who decided to actively seek employment again, half of them found jobs. So how many people is that? That's going to be 25 additional people. So 25 people find jobs, 25 people do not find jobs. And we'll just go ahead and find the unemployment rate here. So what are the number of people unemployed now? It's going to be the 50 people that we had originally unemployed, but out of these 50 people, 25 of them can't find jobs, so therefore it's 25 people that are unemployed in this instance. Does our labor force change? And the answer is no. So here our labor force is still equal to 400 people. It's just the makeup of the labor force that is going to be a little bit different. Before we have 300 people employed, now it's going to be 325 people employed. And before we had 100 people unemployed, here it's only going to be 75 people unemployed. So therefore, it's still 400 people within the labor force. It's just the makeup is a little bit different. Continue to keep on simplifying as much as you can. 75 divided by 400. And because people have actually found jobs, our unemployment rate is lower compared to the second example. Here, 18.75%. So as you can see with all of this, it's not very difficult to calculate out the unemployment rate. It's a very simplistic calculation. It just focuses in on those employed and those unemployed, the labor force as well. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult to see who makes up those that are employed, unemployed, in the labor force and not in the labor force. And that's what I want you to be careful and cognizant more about. So with all of this in mind, go ahead, take a look at all the problems that we've done so far. Also with the practice problems that have already been posted, that'll give you a lot of practice, and continue on with your calculations of the unemployment rate and you'll be good to go. We're going to go ahead and focus in on how the BLS is going to get these very specific numbers for the unemployment rate, as well as a few of the shortcomings of the unemployment rate, just like what we saw in terms of inflation and with GDP, we saw a few of the shortcomings there as well.